Okay, we're live. Hey guys, I'm Tori Townley, and I'm here with my dad, Dane Ollerking, part of the ARC team. So this is the Serve Brew. I hope you have your coffee. Today we
serve
are
Yetis.
serve Yetis.
We didn't serve brew Yetis.
Yeah, cool. Today we have two awesome guests, Pastor Jonathan Wiggins and Pastor Samuel Brum, I guess how you say it, from Resurrection Fellowship in Loveland, Colorado. And these guys are amazing. I had the great privilege of meeting Pastor Jonathan at the art conference in California this past October, and just heard the incredible heart that their church has and he has for the city, and just very unique ideas, very inspiring ways to love their city, and they just go all out. I left there with my mind completely blown, and I hear tons of outreach stories and serve stories all the time, and this just like rocked my world. So ever since October, I've been like, I can't wait for this Serve Brew. I'm so pumped. So if you guys, I'll jump to y'all and just kind of let you share for a minute about your, like, introduce us. I think Dad was interested in how you met each other and a little bromance maybe is happening. I don't know where that question came from, but just introduce yourselves. Like, I know a little bit about y'all, but just share.
Sure. So you're able to hear me now?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So Tori, thanks for the invitation and just a conversation. Dan, good to see you again. I hate to admit it, but Tori, your dad is a pretty awesome guy. Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Wiggins. I'm the lead pastor of REZ Church in Loveland, Colorado. And I've been here about 9 years, originally from Louisiana, where it seems like a lot of these ARC folks, the Cajun Mafia comes from, but I'm from North Louisiana, so I'm like a first cousin to those guys. But moved out here as a worship pastor, connected with this church. It was called Resurrection Fellowship. Before that, Loveland Assembly. So it was, actually this church is about 103 years old, so I did not plant this church. God sent me here to take the church in a new direction. And so I've been worship pastor a couple of years and then became the lead pastor for about 6.5. And for that period of time, really been trying to bring the culture of this church into, it just seems like some of the expressions of our worship and some of the focuses we had were a little dusty and dated. And we're trying to bring some things into the now. And one of the things that I noticed about our church, we had really strong spiritual health, dynamic weekend services, and a couple of outreaches in the community, but it really wasn't week to week, month to month focus. It seemed to be more seasonal, and at the same time, enormous investments around the world in missions. And I just felt like we could be maybe even more effective if we were doing the same thing locally that we're doing in different places around the world. So that really started to ignite my heart for just to have a passion for what's going on around here, the needs that are around here. And even though this is the richest nation in the world, I tell you, there are needs right around us. And so it was in that searching and looking for really strategies, how to do it. I connected with ARC, and also we have a school of ministry here, and there was an incredibly gifted, smart, and I hate to say this right in front of him, a student who he asked me all the hard questions from the Bible, like the guy who asks the questions that actually reads the Bible, and put me in a position to act like I knew more than I did. But anyway, we hit it off, and as we got to know each other through the school, I recognized that Samuel has a very just a gifting to connect with people and a heart for people that need help. And so we went through a period of a couple of years of connecting while he returned to Rio, and eventually we invited him here to be our missions and outreach pastor. And so we met through the church here, through the School of Ministry, and then I invited him to, he went through the whole visa process and everything, came out here, and now he's living here, he and his family, serving and connecting churches and serving in the community. I warned you before this started, I give long answers. That was so good.
That's so cool. Pastor Samuel, do you have anything to add to your story?
Yeah, so I am super glad to be here. Me and my family, we moved like 1.5 years ago. And one of the reasons that I'm glad to be here is because I think I'm from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. Woohoo! Can you guys say woohoo? And it's a great place. And we have been learning with churches in North America for a long time in the 80s, 70s, and we have received a lot from you. And I think coming to US from Brazil is a little bit, I want to say, a harvest, of what you guys planted 30, 40 years ago. It's really rare to see that, but I'm super glad because I am learning a lot with Pastor Jonathan in this church and with you, but I also think that we have something that we can add, and I don't know what, but we do have something. Just be ourselves, and we are glad to be here. I was a dentist, orthodontist, and we have decided to move from Brazil to America just to do ministry. I was a pastor. I am a fourth generation of pastors in Rio, and we decided, me and my wife, let's go there. Let's just go deep in the ministry. So we connected with REZ in Colorado. It's a long story, but I do believe that God brought us here and was really a great connection between my church in Rio and the church REZ in Colorado, but especially my friendship, me and Pastor Jonathan. I really believe that was God. So we are here, we are happy, and we want to just...
Yeah, and let me go ahead and jump in. He's being overly humble. We'll have to work on that. I don't know if you heard him say he's an orthodontist. He's incredibly well-educated, and also in Rio, traveled and ministered and connected lots of churches together. A ministry for widows, feeding and caring for widows, right on the church grounds where he's from. Outreach to youth, incredible giftedness. And in the year and a half he's been here, he's connected our churches in the Front Range. I've connected relationally with the lead pastors in the area. We have it's just a God-honoring thing that's happening. The Bible's pretty clear about God blessing where there's unity. But Samuel has been more at the tactical level, connecting with outreach leaders and teams and organizing. And I tell you, he's just really brought his A game to where the rubber actually meets the road. So I'm able to have the big picture conversations with leaders, but then Samuel gets in there and has activated teams of people like we have not seen before in this area.
Wow. Awesome. That's amazing. Already mind blown. I knew that would happen. That's so cool. So I want to hear more about what is going on internationally. You guys have seriously blown us away. How it's an honor that you guys kind of jumped on the Serve Day thing and just kind of ran with it and got other churches involved in your area. And that's something we'd love to see more of across the country. Just not just, hey, we're doing this here, but who's in the vicinity, how can we work together? And so you guys are doing that both in Loveland and then in Brazil and everywhere. And so I want to hear more about how that came to be on that day. How did that idea happen? But I think even before jumping into that, I would love to kind of rewind to the vision and how you guys started architecting this culture, because you said that your church is over 100 years old and you kind of had to restructure the culture a little bit in the atmosphere. So what did that journey look like? I know I'm talking a lot. I'm thinking out loud.
Sure.
I noticed that you guys are really incredible at looking at people and seeing the opportunity within it. So some of the stories you shared at ARC about the artist guy, and you can talk about that in a minute if you want to, or whatever it is, you see different opportunities in a very unique way. And so just talk about how you see the world and how you created that culture. And then we can talk about the fruit of it. Okay.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. I love this. Actually, a mission statement of our church is to raise up life-giving followers of Jesus who touch their world with God's love. And the name of our town here is Loveland, and and it's actually kind of a neat culture here. So every Valentine's Day, people come and they get their mail postmarked here, and it's Loveland, the land of love, and so I thought, that is a premier identifying characteristic of God's nature. And when I came here, the mission statement was just simply to touch the world with God's love. A real strong international focus, supporting lots of ministries, kind of a typical older church model as far as the many relationships. And we're beginning to narrow to really to be as strategic as possible. But I think at this point, even today, we have over 50 agencies we partner with around the world. And so it ranges from in various orphanages, we help feed and clothe over 1,000 orphans every day. I think 75,000 salvations and partner ministries. None of these are like TV ministries or any major crusades, but just really grassroots, frontline ministries. And so that's an amazing number considering the scope of what they're bringing. Trafficking, all kinds of humanitarian work. We partner with agencies like Jerusalem Institute of Justice. They work to pass legislation in the Middle East to hold nations accountable for human rights issues. And Kalev, who runs that organization, is a messianic believer. So he's a brother in the Lord. And so this idea of touching the world with God's love looked like lots of partnerships, humanitarian aid, but always with a value that we preach the gospel in it. And so with our trafficking efforts, with really every dollar that we have invested historically, the value has been we want to help people in their circumstances, but also we want to help them in such a way that their heart is disarmed to hear the gospel, because that's where the real rescue happens. Also, so that was very established culture here, strong support of Israel, lots of ministries in Israel. And so when I took the lead here, I did my best to try to keep that value, but at the same time build on that and expand on that, which, by the way, I'll tell you, I think that's how succession is supposed to work. And I know this is not a talk on succession, but I really think it's important to tear up as little as possible, but build on the successes of previous generations. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so I really let those preceding values inform where we went and where we would move forward. And so locally, nationally, we really felt like we needed a strategy. Internationally, we're pretty strong. And that's really where ARC came in partnering with ARC to see life-giving churches planted nationally. I know we're talking about serving, but I tell you, I think investing in ARC, partnering with ARC, that's one of the great mechanisms of getting, Tori, what you're passionate about multiplied throughout this nation, and to seeing lots of people come to Jesus and getting help. And then in our own community, partnering with local agencies. At this point, I'm on too many boards because once you start helping, it's kind of amazing actually. Once a person who proclaims Jesus starts helping, there are all kinds of people that are desperate for help, and so we've been getting out there. So just really serving in every way possible in this community, connecting with our local government, city council. One of the best counsel I got as far as just in our own communities to start making immediate impact came from Pastor Matthew Barnett, who's one of our overseers in our church. And he said, hey, buy a sack of that cold asphalt mix and a shovel and drive your pickup truck to city council. And when they start talking about there are potholes on this street, raise your hand up and say, hey, I represent REZ Church in our example, and we'll take care of it. And just to start connecting with the needs, and this is important, with the needs in our community as the leaders of the community perceive they have needs. It's one thing for us to come into a town and say, here's what you need. It's another thing to listen, to understand, and to respect and honor those in authority, and then basically just say, how can we serve? Because serving is actually one of the most effective influence builders as pastors and leaders. When you honor those in authority, you honor God with the way you conduct yourself and you serve, God will raise you up. That's just how it works. So I went from answering your question to preaching, so I'll stop now.
Yeah, that's
So good.
it's rich on a lot of levels, and I'd like to dive into 80 of your different. But I think that, one of the things you said in your opening deal is about culture, and you referred to not tearing down things nearly as much as building on what's already there. I think that speaks to honor, which ties into serving. All of that wraps up together nice. On a really practical level, how do you, and maybe it is just that simple, but is there something else you have that you could share with other guys who are maybe leading a larger church or maybe taking over an existing church, and they're trying to bring, like, they have a passion for serving and understand the serving part of it, but they don't know how to get that church that hasn't been a serving church or an outward focused church, how to get them across that line to seeing that. How has that worked for you? I know it's still a work in progress. As long as you're pastoring, you're going to be in that work in progress. But how do you, how have you done that? And what's left to do on that? Or any advice for younger pastors, newer pastors?
Yeah, I think right out of the gate, if you want the culture to make a shift, it probably ought to be something you're doing yourself. And so it's one thing for me, and you're talking about service, but let's talk about inviting people to church. It's one thing for me to say, hey guys, you need to invite. It's another thing to be able to tell stories of people that I've invited. And what happens is people realize they're not being browbeaten for doing something wrong, but they're hearing their pastor, seeing their pastor share a testimony of what God did just by simply modeling behavior. And a lot of times the stories you tell create culture. So I could say, hey, we're going to serve our community, guys. You better get out there and put on those red shirts and, and do that. Or we could just get out there. And I'll say this is my own experience. I'm not sure I'm in a position to advise other pastors, but I'll just say from my own experience, I talked too much early on and I didn't do enough. And I really think that just getting a little more action oriented, getting out there, making changes, and smiling and talking less from the pulpit. And when I say that, I don't mean, failing to keep people informed, but I almost found myself trying to convince people that where we were going is better than where we were. And that can have a pretty toxic, it's not effective. It's not 100% useful. You get blowback. And especially in my circumstance or in other, you were talking about pastors of larger churches maybe taking over. You gotta be very careful not to go there because you can dishonor the previous leadership. And so I think you lead by example. You celebrate whatever. I mean, if it's a little grain of progress, the tiniest little grain of progress, if 2 people show up to an event and you serve, man, that is the biggest victory your church has ever experienced. Like, you don't turn that into a way to needle the people that didn't show up. Just make it a huge victory. I quoted Matthew Barnett earlier. One of my favorite things he says about leadership, he says, if you're going to be a leader, you just need to know part of leadership is acting and being so positive people question your mental health. And so just celebrating the wins as they are. And then I think not giving people 500 different things to do, but giving people 2 or 3 things to do. Simplicity and repetition, giving people a clear, accessible pathway, to get to, if we want to serve, we know here are the 1 or 2 opportunities, not just keeping it general where we have 500 different things, or even worse, you don't give anybody specifics. You just say, get out there and serve. So I think those are some of the things that I've found that's worked. And really what's left to be done, that's actually a great question. I would say just getting the processes that we've learned, many of these from GROW, from ARC, but just continuing to let those processes create the momentum, that flywheel effect, if you understand what I'm saying. Just staying totally faithful to that. Just keep going, because there are a few months where some of the things that we were introducing weren't very well attended, and you just keep at it because people will jump in. It just takes a bit to build up that momentum. And so for me, it's about faithfulness more than needing immediate results. I heard a leader recently say that we overestimate what we can do in 2 years, and we underestimate what you can do in 10, of just being faithful and going after it a long, long time. So when you're willing to dedicate your life to something, it really is amazing how much progress you can make in a culture. But if you're looking for a quick payoff, and then like in the past, I've had leadership ADD where I try this for a while and it's not amazing right out of the gate. So then I try this, and it's like, just stay faithful and watch God do awesome things. Just stay constant and steady.
I will add something, and I don't like to say good things about him when he's next to me, but I need to be honest with you guys. You deserve, not him. But I was not here before this transition, but I have noticed one of the things that he's doing, Pastor Jonathan is doing, and he's very good, changing the mindset, the culture. I've noticed that this church is very prophetic, and was very prophetic church. And I love that. I think every church needs to be prophetic. But what he has been doing is, let's be prophetic. And after that, let's do something with all the prophetic that we received. And that's something that lacks in some churches. I came from this background. We know how to speak in tongues. We know how to worship. We know how to be crazy. And that's all good. I'm not against that. The problem is, that's not the limit. That's not the end. Actually, that's the bridge to reach something even more beautiful than that. So I've noticed that Pastor Jonathan is very good in provoking the church and doing something more than just receive. So I think, and for me, as a missions pastor, it's really easy to be a missions pastor with him leading the church. Why? Because the culture of the church is really, he's provoking and encouraging the church to be aware, to be sensitive, not only to the Holy Spirit, of course, but to our neighbors, to our city, to our community. So answering your question is, Serve Day or outreach in my department is not only my department. And it is something that is in his heart. So he talks about this normally and naturally. So that helps me a lot, just lead the project. But this is something that he speaks, he teaches. So I think this is great.
If I ever have low self-esteem issues, I just go to his office and say, just tell me about me. I'm totally kidding.
That's so fun. And by the way, also having a beautiful man on your staff is probably a really good thing.
I think he called you beautiful.
Okay.
With great teeth too, by the way.
Thank you.
Tori, I feel like maybe you and I shouldn't be on this call right now.
You said something that I threw my hands up. You couldn't hear Tori, but she was shouting when you said the thing about serving not being just a department. And I think that we probably have conversations along those lines where even Serve Day itself, if we're not careful, can just become this is an event. It's a big day. Everybody serves. And 364 other days we do other stuff.
Yeah.
And that's just our heart. Both of us, our heart is just not to be that, but to have it be a catalyst to get something going through the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And I think the way you said that was beautiful. It's not just a department that you try to crank up and get the church involved in, but the pastor is leading this. It's the heart. It permeates everything throughout the whole church. And I think, your school, all the different things you guys do, all the stories I've heard Pastor Jonathan tell about the church, it's like, it's serve. The whole thing is serve. Everything you guys do.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
We learned so many things. I really can't stress this enough. I really don't know the backgrounds of the people who are watching, but connecting with ARC and Grow Leader and these agencies or ministries that are, I just consider them to be model ministries, meaning that if you want to succeed or get 5% better, there are resources out there. And I really think a lot of times as pastors, we try to be clever and original instead of using proven models that can actually change the world. And so for example, you talk about Serve Day not just being a standalone thing. honestly, Pastor Chris Hodges will talk about Serve Day as I've understood him, when he says this is really a time for everybody. Now, not everyone all year may have this certain gift of service, but at the same time, and this is my language, not his, don't cop out and say that's not my gift, I never have to.
Yeah.
And so I think Serve Day is more like all hands on deck. And then you have serve teams, adopt a block, and other things for people who would consider that their dream, their passion, their strength, so that there is a culture throughout the year. So it does need to be bigger than one event. Otherwise, the people who are called to serve all year are going to be frustrated because their giftings aren't out there and on display for God, by the way, not for people. And so Serve Day is more like all hands on deck, and then serve teams and adopt a block and the things that happen the rest of the year. That's really where people are able to use their giftings and their passions for ministry. And so you have to have both if you want, especially that core group, to be fulfilled and to be, to live the dream. You have to have those opportunities. And it's also a credibility builder in the community. When you hear people preach the gospel and that same community, for example, brings houses, low-income housing, up to code, or work on public lands to do major cleanup and things like that. Whenever people know, hey, these guys are not just talking; they're out there serving. It's actually amazing who will come through the doors when they see your church outside of your building. They'll come in.
Am I jumping ahead to ask him to tell the story of the artist? Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, the story of the artist, that whole thing that you guys had happen there, that you talked about it at the art conference.
Sure. So there was a season where I was preaching just basically reconciliation. Being a church that's been around a long time, there are lots of people that have come and gone, and so I just started preaching really out of Luke, the parable of the lost lamb, the prodigal son, the lost coin. Basically, I just challenged, hey, let's invite people who were here years ago. If they're not going to church anywhere, invite them. And then we had a ton of people coming in at the same time, and they put their faith in Jesus for the first time. So anyway, I got excited, as pastors sometimes do, and I got up there, and I'm seeing all these new faces as I'm talking about this in this series of coming home. And I saw these new faces, and so I just asked, hey, how many of you guys you just put your faith in Jesus, or you just started attending here, or you just have returned? I mean, hands went up, and I got a little too excited because I said, hey, and I had no pre-meetings with my staff. I didn't warn them this. I didn't even know this was going to happen. And let me just say to you leaders, please don't do this to your team, because that requires forgiveness on the other side. But I said, in 2 weeks from today, for all these people that have come home, because in Luke, the lost coin, the lost lamb, and the prodigal son, when the lost one returned, in every story, they threw a party, huge party. And so I was like, hey, if we're going to look like heaven, we need to throw a party for you guys. And so in 2 weeks, I so oversold this, it's crazy. I said, in 2 weeks, we're going to have the biggest party you've ever seen. I had just gone on a Disney cruise with my family, so that probably was why I was so excitable. But one of the things they did was they had paid staff at this Disney cruise, and this, just trust me, I have a point here. They had this red carpet entrance to the ship, and then they had paid staff who had flashing, like paparazzi, like flash bulbs. And so when you walked onto the ship, instead of just walking on like other cruises, it's Disney. So you walk on with the family, and they get your name, and they have a professional announcer. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Jonathan Wiggins and family. And they have people going, and you feel like a rock star and I thought, hey, let's do this for new people and for new believers. And so we set up this party. So for that 2-week period, while we were setting up the party, and I ended up personally introducing over 450 people to our congregation. It took way too long. The food got cold anyway. And but we had a cool party. We had a 4-foot disco ball and a DJ dressed up as an astronaut and all kinds of lighting. It was it was quite the party. But that 2-week period of time while we were prepping, totally inward focused, getting ready. Across town, there was a traveling art exhibition that had come in, and the name of one of the pieces was The Misadventures of the Romantic Cannibals. All right, and so it was a religious critique lithograph. It was actually, it was a pretty disgusting image, and it used some of the imagery of Jesus, and it was sexually suggestive and just really quite remarkable. And so some of the believers, while we were busy throwing our party, there were other people that were going through the museum and they saw this piece, and some of the believers in Loveland got a permit to protest. They started protesting. In just a couple of days, it made the news. A couple more days, it made the national news, and a bunch of people who called themselves Christians started emailing the museum and the artist who's in California. His name's Enrique. They found his email. They found the email of the museum, and they got over 37,000 hate letters and death threats in 6 days.
Wow.
And 100% of these people call themselves Christians. And so the day after the party, I get this message from an angry church member who had been protesting and said, "Hey, you've got the biggest church in town. You are a leader. How could you not speak out publicly in support of the protest?" And so I didn't know what any of this was about. So I started reading up on it and looked at the piece online, and it's, I didn't like it one bit, but I didn't really care about the art. Once I realized how dangerous and tense, the Bible says, unless the Lord builds a house, we labor in vain. But then the rest of that verse says, unless the Lord watches over the city, we watch in vain. And I really believe it's our job as pastors and leaders and believers to be watchmen. I noticed on your cup you have a watchman there. That's right. And I really believe part of this was a watchman maybe call on, because my concern was not about the art piece. It was about the people and about the artist. So I reached out to the artist. He's a teacher at Stanford. So I looked up his name, and it was stanford.edu. And at this point, he had gotten so many threats, he was under 24-hour protective custody from the Stanford Police Department. And so I just sent him a message. I knew it would get his attention. I messaged in the subject line, "Message from a pastor in Loveland." I knew he would answer. He would read it, and basically said, "Hey, I'm a newer pastor in the community, and this is going on. I know about the protests, and honestly, I'm not reaching out to you to argue with you. I'd like to hear what it is you're trying to say." And basically, I told him, "I'm not going to argue with anything you say. I just want to understand what it is you're trying to say." And within 2 hours, he responded with 4 paragraphs, and which surprised me. Truth is, I thought I would just send out an email so that my angry church member, I could just tell him later, "Hey, I reached out to the guy," but I didn't think he would respond, but he did. And we started emailing back and forth. And so while things were escalating in our community, God had opened a door for me to connect relationally with this guy. And he basically had been, he's from Mexico City. He was raised in a Catholic upbringing, and the Catholic school was physically abusive to him. He was very bitter. And this was his way of kind of getting back at some of the abuses he experienced. And I reached out, and this is what he said to me. He said, "I think the idea of Jesus is beautiful. It's pastors and priests that make him look pretty terrible." And I'm going to tell you, I don't approve of the artwork, but I kind of agree that as pastors, we don't always make Jesus look awesome. And so I said, "Hey, I get it." And so we started this conversation. Well, about 4 or 5 days later, I felt like God gave me this idea, and I said, "Hey, you said that the image of Jesus is beautiful, and I would like to see, I saw the image you created critiquing the church, but I would like to see how you see Jesus." And I invited him. I said, "Would you create an honoring image of Jesus? If you will do that, I will hang it in my church." Now, what's hilarious about this is guy is a world-class artist. His works are in the Met Museum in New York, in Sydney's Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum. I mean, this guy is legit. And basically, I'm asking him to paint me a free image of Jesus, which later, once he did it, the insurance company valued just the painting at $35,000. So he said, yeah, I think I would do that, but would your church accept something from someone like me? Which I thought was such an amazing way to ask that question, because he knew that what he had done was antagonistic to the church, and so I said, hey, I don't know, let me ask them, would you be okay with me reading our email dialogue to my church? Okay, so very quickly, as that was happening, and I asked him would he be willing to paint, that very day, that was a Wednesday, one of the protesters left the protest, went to the Ace Hardware store, bought a crowbar, went back to the museum, walked in and smashed the plexiglass in front of the original piece, ripped it to shreds, and the workers at the museum had gotten so many death threats that when they heard that explosive sound, they thought it was a gunshot. They called the cops. The cops came in, arrested this woman. There's a woman who did it. And as they're dragging her out, a reporter took a picture, and her shirt said, "My Savior is tougher than nails." And now here we're talking about an honoring image of Jesus, a disgusting image of Jesus. This was the controversy. But I'm going to tell you something. When I found out that happened, I Googled that night, Jesus, not art controversy, nothing else. I just Googled Jesus, the word Jesus, and her image and this act of vandalism. And I thought, who's making Jesus look pretty bad right now? We are. And so I reached out to Enrique, and I basically said, hey, I'm praying for your safety, and let me know. And I said, but I would like you to continue to consider. And so creating this piece. So we built this, continued to build a relationship, and I did read the emails to the church. There were standing ovations. I mean, because they knew what was going on, and to know that the pastor had actually reached out to this guy in a friendly way, and he had agreed to paint an honoring image of Jesus. And then he asked me, how do you describe Jesus? And I thought, of all the conversations, that was an opportunity for me to share my faith. So instead of sharing the Jesus that I would see in pictures, I just shared the Jesus of the Bible, that he was able to see people where other people saw labels. And he had high standards. He was a standard bearer, but at the same time, he would forgive people right in the middle of their deepest, darkest moment. His grace is greater and redeemed people. And what he did on the cross, Father, forgive them, are words that have impacted 2,000 years of human history. I mean, I'm giving him this answer. I'm crying. I'm praying for the guy's soul. And he responds with, I see Jesus in your description, and that will be my guide for the portrait. He ended up requesting, which I don't know anything about art. I learned this from him, that artists do not like written descriptions next to their images. They like it to be more of a subjective deal, which sounds super snotty to me, but whatever. But he asked me, would I please put, when the picture was painted, would I please put this description of Jesus next to it? And he talked to me about how this friendship has been transformative in his life. And so now this guy goes around, and I don't think he's put his faith in Jesus. But listen to this. He goes around the world and he talks about, because this was a big art controversy having to do with the Christian faith coming against his freedom of expression. Now he is an authority on freedom of speech and art expression and these kinds of things. And he goes around the world and he talks about his experience. And everywhere he goes, he talks about this church in Loveland, Colorado, this pastor that reached out as a friend, that talked about Jesus in this honoring way that basically reflected Jesus well. And then he shows, everywhere he goes, he shows the image that he painted for our church. We have had art students in our community start attending this church. I've had people send me pieces of art to critique, and I always say, I'm from a trailer park. Like, I don't know anything about art, okay? But invited to art exhibitions, or when people are writing a thesis on different topics from different, I mean, even Ivy League schools, they will ask me to make comments on this crazy story. So it was an amazing thing, and God has opened incredible doors in Loveland, nationally, and really even in different nations, just because we took a minute to reach out to a guy who honestly, as offensive as everything was, the art that he was creating, he was broken and hurting, and he just needed somebody who would listen and be available to him. And so I pray for my friend Enrique. I know that God is going to complete what he started in Enrique's life. But anyway, that's my story.
Good
One of
Lord.
my favorite.
I know.
Yeah.
I've like told him that story probably 50 times since I heard it at art conference, but it wasn't all right. But that every time just chills. I love that you guys, when I heard you talk for the first time, I believed you. And I was prepared for, okay, it's an app session. I'm going to get my 5 steps to how to do outreach. Okay, cool. I was like, I've heard it all. I'm just going to sit here and meet the guy. Awesome. And I wasn't being snotty. It was just like, okay, cool. I'm glad. But when you started talking, and I was like, he believes in this. He's not here to tell me his strategy. He's here to tell me what he believes in and who he is. And the fact that you had, this was one of probably 10 stories you told in that session. And I still go back and think about them. And it gives me hope. Like, I'm not here just being a robot executing so that I can say, check a box, did what Jesus said to do. No, that was, you notice people, and that's contagious. And I believed in it because you did. And it gave me a new spark in something that I do every single day. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. And I think it's something that many churches will be able to learn, like the importance of what this influence is. Because now that you did see the brokenness, you didn't just write him off as a jerk like everyone else did, because you can notice that in people. Now the influence, like you talked about the art communities looking back to you. And I remember you saying that you guys have like environmentalists coming to you because you have a car charge or whatever it is in your church, like all this stuff. It's just, everything's an opportunity. And I just really thank you for that. So. Well,
especially church planters and a lot of the people that you guys are connected with, we're always looking for location, right? For our facilities. And we want to be at a hub of some kind and connected somehow with a population center. And I'm going to tell you that a big part of that is geographic, but there are also ways to position your church in sectors that cause you to kind of be a blip on the radar in lots of different ways. And so when you think about location, geography, of course, is huge and so critically important, but so is what groups and what sectors and what interests you can connect with. And so the environmentalist thing, I'm not really an environmentalist, but I see the environmentalist movement as a movement that is a potentially ripe mission field, and that needs Christian representation. And it's one thing to say, oh, they're a bunch of crazy people, or they're a bunch of liberals, or whatever you want to say about that group of people. But they're also people that God created that desperately need hope, and they need the gospel presented to them in a way they can receive. And so the environmental group, for example, I thought there's an opportunity there because in our immediate area, there's a big initiative around the electrification of vehicles, electric cars. And so I went out and leased a little cheap electric cars. And there's so many rebates. It's ridiculous how cheap you can get these things on a lease. And their value drops like a stone. So don't buy electric cars, lease them anyway. And so I got this a little electric car. Now, I'm going to say, I didn't say this in the session you referred to. My men's ministry, they have ragged me mercilessly about this electric car. So I paid a little price, in all in good fun, but they actually took keys from my wife. She was in on the whole gag, and took this little tiny car, and they put, this is horrible, but you know those big metal the decoration they put on the back of trucks sometimes. They put this on the back of my car, and then they lifted up the front of the car to make it look like the weight from that was so much that it made the front kick out. Basically, and then they put pink flowers on it and the whole thing. So I paid a price for this electric car. But what it did was, it, as a Christian and as a leader in this community, it put me into some emailing lists and other networks of the electrification movement in this area. And there was such an interest because there was a Christian leader who was not attacking, but instead, curious, open, interested. And so they started inviting me to speak. I spoke at Colorado State University. I've spoken in different venues, and I know really remarkably little about the electrification of vehicles, but for them, this was like such a rare person, a Christian person. And so what I did instead was I talked about the origins of the environmental movement were deeply Christian. Mm-hmm. And John Muir, who's the father of the Sierra Club, and I know the Sierra Club's not really known being a Christian organization, but John Muir was a pastor's son who could quote the entire New Testament and about 75% of the Old Testament. And he would walk out into nature, and he said that the glory of God was on display in nature far greater than the most beautiful cathedrals made by human hands. And he started writing these devotionals, and the conservation movement started because of this guy's heart for God. And so I was able to go into these environmental places and saying, hey guys, you don't know this, but you have faith roots. Yeah. And I would talk about the creation account and how we're given dominion to care for this planet. And so I'm not a radical environmentalist, and I've got guns and all kinds of things they would not be proud of to know that I had. But I'm able to present my faith in a way that these people have just absolutely been disarmed. So we're the first church in Colorado to have a charging station and electric car charging station, and it was like over 80% of it was paid for by the city government. So my church, they weren't complaining about the cost. They knew. I told them this is something that they're really pushing, and we want to get into this. And so that was another example of how the Green Car Reports, which is one of the largest electric vehicle publications in America, they did a full story on this pastor. And I'm telling you, there's an opportunity for believers, if we want to be even the least bit innovative, to step into some of these sectors. Don't compromise a thing. Be you, but get into these areas and connect relationally. Jesus called people to follow him before he called them to change. And I think we can get into these sectors and connect relationally, and then people have an opportunity to change. A lot of times we want people to change before we're willing to be in a relationship with them, and that is not the model that I see in the Word. So again, I went to preaching, but that's how I feel about that.
So good.
Preaching.
So good.
No, we're not muted.
No, we're not muted.
It's in your mouth. Yeah.
Wow. So good.
Wow.
So, yeah, love all of that. I want to hear now, after hearing your heart and the culture and just incredible stuff, I want to hear a little bit about how that culture is carrying over to Brazil and what you guys are doing there. And even just, I know like in Loveland, y'all are working with churches, we can talk about that too, but really specifically, what is going on in Brazil? Because Pastor Samuel, you emailed us and you're like, hey, we're getting a bunch of pastors together. We're like, what? Talk about Surf Day? Okay, sure. We'll send a thank you video to these guys, of course, but we should be thanking you because that's awesome. So what's going on there? Just spiel.
Yeah, so like I told you, I'm from Brazil, and I'm here, but I know the potential that they have, and the needs there are very tangible. If we compare Colorado to Rio, for example, it's just walking in the streets, you can see. One thing that I've noticed, the churches, they get comfortable with that environment instead of let's do this, like let's change this. And there's a stronghold. It's not only in Rio, it's not only Brazil, but South America of corruption, and I can see the reflection of this corruption in the churches. Great people, they love God, but they just they, instead of changing the culture, they are being comfortable instead of changing. Again, I'm gonna highlight that churches can be prophetic, but for me, it doesn't matter if Paul said that. Doesn't matter if you speak in tongues and you don't love. So basically, it's really what I believe, and I've been learning with this a lot. So my point with Brazil was, I know the potential that you guys have. I know the needs here, and I think Serve Day can be a great strategy. I don't think Serve Day is the essence. I think Serve Day is just a model or just an event, and it's catalytic. We'll create a culture of awareness and compassion, just trying to do more and just trying to do together as a church. And well, if we are in the same city, we have one thing in common. We have the city. And if we get together, we're going to establish the kingdom, and it's going to be easier instead of doing only by your denomination or what you believe. So our experience with Brazil was pretty cool. Last week we met and we had 34 pastors meeting, saying that I think all of them say, hey, we're gonna do this. Because I've been working with unity with churches and leaders in Brazil, in Portugal, and here in Colorado, and I've noticed that Serve Day, it's a great opportunity to express unity of the church, because we just want to establish God's kingdom in our city. Let's do this together, regardless what our doctrines or denomination stuff. So it's pretty cool to see the church in Brazil. So they heard, all of those leaders heard about Serve Day for the first time, but they got excited, inspired, and they want to do something. And I told them, hey, we won't change everything, but let's try, right? I mean, let's try. I think if we try, we're gonna be able to inspire other churches to come with us. And one of the things that I really believe, I think our society, like Pastor Jonathan said about the artists, they're very traumatized with the churches. And when they see a competition between churches, it's kind of like they don't want to be part of that. But when they see churches getting united because of the city, because of God that they serve, that's a great tool and bridge to restore the image of the church for those people that are very disappointed and traumatized. I think this happens a lot in the United States. I think that happens a lot in Brazil. I think if instead of like saying this is a REZ project, we want to change our city, instead of saying that, we would say, hey, this is a project of many churches in this city, and we are doing this because we believe in the church, not in our church only. So I think it's a great strategy, an opportunity to reach those, not only those who need, but those who are traumatized and hurt with the church. So yeah, it's going to be the first time that we're going to do in Brazil. You guys going to receive a lot of hashtags, Serve Day, Rio 17. But also we have around 45, 50 missionaries here. And one of the things that we're going to do this year, I spread the word to our missionaries. Those missionaries that work with churches and planting churches, not all of them, some of them. And so for the first time, I talked to them about Serve Day, what's the point, how good was for us. So
what are some of the nations where they're
yeah, so because of that, we're gonna have Serve Day for the first time in Mexico, in Mozambique, Kenya, Botswana in Africa, Paraguay, Brazil, Romania, Tel Aviv, Israel, Philippines, yeah, around 10 countries.
Romania.
Yeah, okay, that's like your geography is like a little bit collected, and then you go to Botswana and then Romania. So that's awesome. I tell you, one of the things that I think is so cool about this is the transferability of it. The thing that you just said, Samuel, about for churches, and this is what I spend most of my time trying to do, is to get pastors to connect with each other. A lot of times it's around the city, and it's this, you're trying to find a common ground. And yes, we all have the common ground of believing in Jesus as the one way to heaven. But to find that other common ground, sometimes it's, hey, we're doing church in small towns. That's great, or we're doing church in urban environments, or we're doing church, whatever. But the one thing you just said that I wasn't texting somebody, I was writing notes. I wrote it down. We have this one thing in common. It's our city.
Yeah.
You're pastors. We say it all the time, but you're pastors. You're called not to pastor just that church, but you're there to pastor that city.
Yeah. And
if we can get pastors to see that together, we can get churches to see that together. Sometimes it's not the pastors competing; it's the people among the churches. But whatever, if this can be a factor, a catalyst for uniting the church in cities, then that ends up being something awesome. And I think that's transferable, whether it's Romania, Philippines, Botswana. What did you say? Uganda.
Kenya, Mozambique.
Mozambique. You should be doing some Mozambique. You got your Brazilian Portuguese on.
Yeah.
Or Angola, you go there too. But to get that, I think where it transfers out is a pure byproduct or pure fruit of Serve Day. If we do it right, we'll see that happen. So I'll say this: just thank you for carrying that ball forward. And Pastor Jonathan, I know you did that locally right there last year with Serve Day with the getting churches together, and that's just so many great stories. We look back, and I can't wait to see what comes this year out of stuff.
And I would say with Loveland and the Front Range of Colorado where we are, again, my relationship with lead pastors opened the door, but Samuel got in there and he got teams within those churches to be activated. And so we ended up this is our first year to do Serve Day, was 16, and we had 9, including our own church. We had 9 churches get involved. We had the CSU football team came out. We had people running for office because that's such a good photo op, to have these. And we decided to actually let them come out there because we felt like that would help brand the area with what we're doing too. And actually, one of the guys who worked, his name's Hugh McKean. He won his election and invited me to his where he what's the vow or the basically making the commitment to serve faithfully the law. And so I was in the State House and it's it built. He was sworn in. That's right. And so it built a relationship with a guy who's now in the state legislature. It's just been 100% win. And I want to say this: when you said that the city is what we have in common, I want to tell you how important, as a pastor and as a believer, we have to find ways to work together. And I believe nothing less than the credibility of the gospel is at stake. Because Jesus said, "Father, make us one, so the world will know you sent me." Our unity in a community is absolutely, it is the credibility of our faith claim. Mm-hmm. And it's one thing to say, hey, the city is what we have in common. That's absolutely true. We've got to find what we have in common, and the city is the way to do it. But the payoff is beyond fixing a fence or a house. It's a statement in our community that Jesus was truly sent of the Father. This is Jesus' prayer. "Father, make us one, so the world will know that you sent me." And I think that's absolutely the credibility of the gospel is on the line here for us to, as leaders, to partner together and work together.
Well put. The credibility of the gospel is on the line, and we get to do it. It's a responsibility. It's also an incredibly insane opportunity that we human beings get to carry this forward. So, we were.
I think we might be losing you guys. you want to mute the